How's everybody doing? Good. Well, we are so glad that you're here. Welcome to NorthRidge. If this is your first time, I want to encourage you to stop out in the atrium on your way out. We have a special gift for you just for being here. If you could do me a favor, and well, not me personally. I mean, we'd like it as a church. If you could take the little book at the end of each of your rows and fill that out, pass that down, let us know you stopped by. We want to let you know one big thing that's coming up next weekend. It's our celebration weekend. This is a time every year that we take to reflect back on the past year and to thank God and to thank others around us for what He's been doing in this church, in your life, in your families. And I'm grateful to be a part of this church community. I hope you are too. And next week during the service, you'll have an opportunity to share whatever gratitude you have to God and to others. And then we're going to go out to Otsego Park after the 10:30 service on Sunday and picnic together. There's food. It's going to be fun. There's going to be games. And then we're going to have baptism down in the river. Apparently, the water level is super high, so it's going to be really adventurous and fun. If you've never been baptized before, this is the time right now just to do it. And really, baptism is simply a public proclamation of your faith and your commitment to follow Jesus. And we encourage you to do that if you have yet to be baptized. And if you want to do that, come and talk to one of the pastors, and we'd love to talk and pray with you about that. It's going to be good. It's going to be lit. It's free. You don't have to pay. You just come and hang out, and it's going to be wonderful. So that is all of that. I lost my little playlist here. I'm kind of running things by myself today. We're ending this series that we've been in for the last 5 weeks or so called Say What? Everybody say what? All right, now everybody say it with a little more attitude, because that's usually the way that you hear, right? With a little attitude. You heard something, or somebody did something, and said something you didn't agree with, it was confusing or whatever, and then you said, yeah, a little bit more attitude. One more time, 1, 2, 3. Say what? All right. Just to give you a little series recap of where we came from, we started this the first week after Easter. And it was the idea of this was to think of some questions that, maybe us as Christians, non-Christians even, would have about God, the Bible, and all that kind of stuff. And so the first week was this one. Actually, I wasn't even here. I went to Hawaii. I was in Hawaii for this one. What is that? Is it reasonable? Say what? Who said that? That's good. I love that. By the way, just so you know, please heckle me or whatever. Interact. I like the interaction. This is kind of my style. I'm going to be, loose. You guys do the same. So week one, is it reasonable to believe God exists? So that was the question we asked. And by the way, if you missed any of these, I encourage you to go back and listen to them online. You can go to our YouTube and watch the sermons. You can download the Apple Podcast. There's a lot of great ways to get this stuff back. So if you missed it like I did, I listened to this online. That was the first week. The second week, we asked this question: is it reasonable to believe that the Bible is reliable? So we talked about God and His existence, and then where do we get all this information about God? Well, it's from the Bible, and is it reasonable to believe the Bible is reliable? The third week was, is it reasonable to follow Jesus, which I actually was also gone for because I was with the youth on a retreat, and so again, I went back and listened to that online. And then last week, which is maybe one of the more challenging questions, if you can get over the existence of God in the Bible, this one was really tough. Is it reasonable to believe God is good when there's so much evil in this world? Tough question. Great answer. Go back and listen to. You might not be repodcasting this week's, but this week we are going to take one more step, because in 1 Peter tells us this. Why don't you read this with me? It says, "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks, to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander." That's a funny way to end that. But we hope this series has been helpful. If you don't identify as a Christian and you haven't put your faith in Jesus, we hope it was helpful for you, because Maybe it answered some questions that you might have had. Maybe it clarified some things. Maybe you heard something that a church person or a Christian or a pastor said, and it really, your response was, say what? What did you say? And so hopefully this series kind of helped you with those questions. It helps you learn about what we believe as Christians. And then for church people, like for me, I've been going to church most of my life, and we hope that it clarified things for you even. Maybe you still had questions about God and about the Bible and about some of this stuff, and there's a certain period of your life that you went through that really put some of that stuff into doubt. And so this series hopefully is helpful for everybody as we walk through this. Today, we're going to ask this question. This is going to be a fun one. I mean, whatever. Is it reasonable to love those we believe are wrong? And that's an interesting question, because if you look at the landscape of just cultural conversations today, to me it seems like we don't do a very good job of disagreeing and still being friends afterwards. I don't know about you. This is just my observation. Whether it's politics, religion, social justice issues, education, sports even, we can't disagree well and maintain relationships. We too easily let contempt and anger and fear and, pride and all these different things in. And at the end of the day, we're not maintaining the relationships that we had. I used to use this phrase, maybe you've heard this phrase, agree to disagree. I had a friend who used to say that to me a lot. And it was always a nice, polite way to kind of end a part of a conversation and just move on, right? Well, even that doesn't seem like that's something that's used today as much. It's like, if you disagree with me, you're wrong, I'm right, or you're evil, I'm good, or you're bad, I'm fine. Right? Is this your experience, or is this just my experience? This is kind of my experience. You're even infringing on somebody's freedoms or identity if you believe something that is contrary to what they believe, and then that's what happens, and it fractures relationships and separates people. And I'm not totally sure why this is happening. I think I can look at things and sort of start to understand why, but I think I have a few reasons, and maybe you can fill in some of your own blanks based on your own experiences. So basically kind of write your own sermon here. One of the reasons would be that we all have our own starting point. We all have different experiences. We all have we see the world through different lens, right? And we all have different things that influence the way we believe and the way we see this world. Another reason is we become increasingly more and more cloistered. We like to click ourselves into these groups. Maybe you've heard this phrase that we surround ourselves with people that are like us, and we surround ourselves with people that like us. And that's nice. It's not a bad thing either. It's comfortable. It's easy. But what happens is when we do that too much, and that's all we do, is that we become less willing to have conversations with people that believe something that we believe, other than what we believe. And we have harder times having relationships with people that disagree with our point of view and our perspective. You heard of this phrase called confirmation bias? You know what that is? It's when we favor the information that we get and we that confirms our pre-existing beliefs or biases, and then we accept it. Even if it's true or not true, it doesn't even matter if there's facts. We just do that. And so when we get around people that agree with us and that believe the same things with us and even look like us and talk like us, quack like us, like the duck, is that how the phrase goes? It looks like a duck, talks like a duck. It's confirmation bias, and we get too comfortable, and we are less willing to, because it's harder. It's more challenging. There's more work to be done there. So that's one of the other reasons. And then maybe some other reasons is that we forget how to do this because we're so used to just this easy thing. Or maybe we just don't care. Have you ever met somebody who just doesn't care? They don't care. They don't try to have healthy conversations with people. Maybe that's pride that gets in the way. That, I used to, sometimes this gets out of me sometimes, and I'm sorry if it happens to you. But you have to just be right about everything. Those types of people. You just, it's whatever I say. It's like, oh, I got to be right. I have to have the last word or any of that kind of stuff. Selfish or whatever. So there's this cool parable I found as I was thinking about all this stuff, and since the time that Ben sort of invited me to share with you today, I guess that's the nice way to put it, is this parable found in Matthew. If you have a Bible, you can open it up. If you don't, just sit back and listen, because this is a really interesting parable. Not one that you hear much. Parables, basically what they are, if you don't know, is they're these fictional stories that Jesus would tell to kind of get a point across, a spiritual point. And there would be little analogies and stories and stuff just to help. Because if you're like me, you're a simple person and you need things, put down in a simple way. That Jesus said, feed my sheep, not my giraffe, right? And so we got to put things on the bottom shelf. So in Matthew 18, so if you have a Bible, you can flip there. And we start at verse 23. And this is a parable of the unmerciful servant. And there's two sides of this, the same kind of people that we're talking about today. It says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven, this is verse 23, is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Now, okay, so 10,000, where's Erin? Is she even in the room anymore? So her 10,000 talents is a lot of money. It's just several bags of gold that would last like 11 lifetimes. So that's quite a bit of money that this guy owed the king. And so he brought them. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay this debt, which would be in the king's right to do. So he said, you can't pay me back. I'm going to take your family. I'm going to take your wife and your kids. I'm going to take everything that you own, and we're just going to sell it. And whatever I can recoup, I get to keep, and then we're going to be good. Pretty crazy. What would you do? You'd probably do what the servant did. He fell on his knees. Verse 26, before him, and this is what he said. This is pretty cool. He said, be patient with me. He begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. It's pretty amazing. This is where it gets a little screwy. But when the servant went out, so the servant who just got his debt canceled, he went out. He found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, which would be like $50. He grabbed him and began to choke him. I don't know why I'm laughing. I just think it's funny. So this dude just got a lifetime of debt given, just totally canceled out. And one of his buddies owes him, $50, and he chokes him out to get him to pay him back. I think we've all maybe been both of these guys. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him. Here's that phrase again. Be patient with me, and I will pay you back. Such an amazing phrase. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt, which seems like a complicated thing. If you're in jail, how are you going to work to make the money to pay, off the debt? It's just a parable, by the way. When the other servants saw what had happened, so everybody around is just observing and seeing all this take place, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that had happened. So the king who forgave the debt, they went back to him and said, you should have seen what was going on today. And then the master called the servant in, and he said, you wicked servant, I canceled all your debt because you begged me. Shouldn't you have done the same thing and had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had had on you? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. Again, how do you do that if you're going to be in jail and tortured? But it's a story, and it's a story of forgiveness and mercy. But it's also a story of what we fall into sometimes on this side of how can we be, like what Peter said, be gracious and respectful in our responses to people. And so I want to ask again, is it reasonable to love those we believe are wrong? And I want to bring you on just a little journey of my own thought process, so just keep in mind, be patient with me. Keep in mind, this is just where I was at the beginning of thinking about all this, not where I am today right now. But when I first started thinking about this question, and again, be patient with me, don't walk out. My initial response was, doesn't seem to me that it is very reasonable to love those that you believe are wrong. Like, if you think about this word reasonable, so I looked it up because I need to look up words. I like to know what they mean. And it said sound judgment. It said sensible, fair, appropriate. Is it sound judgment? Is it fair? Is it appropriate to love those who we believe are wrong? And I just was stuck in the mud for a while thinking, I'm not sure. I don't think so. So maybe ask this question in the the context of reasonable. Was it reasonable for a young person over all these years, this is Memorial Weekend, to enlist in the military, to train to be a soldier, to put the uniform on and to go out into combat, to give their life for your freedom, for your future, for your family, for your hopes and dreams? There's estimated 1.1 million people over the years who have died for their country, for this country. They didn't know your name. They didn't know your family. They didn't know your job, your future hopes. They sacrificed their own family, their own future, so that you could have yours. Was it reasonable for them to do that? Here's another one. Was it reasonable for God, the creator of this universe, the most powerful being that exists, to send his son to this earth to give his life as a sacrifice, as payment for your sin and my sin? Was it reasonable for Jesus to do that? And that's where I got stuck, and I wasn't so sure. And maybe you're writing a different sermon, but to me it didn't seem logical, it didn't seem sensible, it didn't seem even maybe appropriate that Jesus would die for all my garbage, all your garbage. And that's why it's challenging, and because it's acting against the natural tendencies of the way that we think and feel, or at least my natural tendencies. So I asked the question, what do I do with this? How do I move on from thinking about, like, how do we celebrate this Memorial Day and honor those who have given their life, and sometimes it feels so overwhelming that it's like, what do we do next? How do we move on from that? Because I'll tell you this, and maybe you'd agree, is that what we're doing in our culture and the conversation of dissenting relationships and arguing and fighting and social media fights and all this stuff, it's just not working. So that's why I think we look at the life of Jesus and what he did and what he said was just so incredibly brilliant. He was amazing. Because if we're going to break out of this rut, we need to see things from a different perspective that's different than our own. We need to see things from a different through different lens, through different eyes that's not ours, because our own perspective is persuading us, always going to persuade us in the same direction. And Jesus is going to offer us that perspective, that lens. There's this verse in John this is something I've been living with for like the last, almost a year. That's sort of I've been trying to make it my theme, just my life, and living with, thinking about it every day, and the way that I treat people and the way that I deal with situations in my life. This is John 13. And we have the golden rule. Everybody heard of the golden rule? What's the golden rule? Was that Liam? Your hand was up. Ooh, he's being brave. Yeah, it's being kind to people who aren't kind to you. Thanks. To give Liam a hand. Is to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the golden rule. And that's what Jesus answered. First, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then second, love your neighbor as yourself. But then Jesus, this is the night that he got arrested, before he got crucified, before he was arrested and betrayed and tortured. He's hanging out in the upper room with his boys, just kicking it. And they're talking, and this is like, if you think this is the last time he gets a chance to talk to his disciples, and this is his last words, and this is one of the things that he said. So you know it's important, right? You know that, like, if you've ever been called in that moment, that this is the last thing that your relative, your loved one is going to say. They're going to say something, and you're going to listen, right? This is it. This is Jesus' moment to share his final words to his disciples. And this is what he says: "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So loving one another, no exceptions, this is what Jesus is telling us to do. And not as you love yourself, even. So if that's the golden rule, this would be like the diamond platinum rule or something. Tim, would that be like the next step on the jewelry thing? Yeah, the platinum rule is love one another as I have loved you. And that's what he's saying. That's the lens, that's the filter that we want to start to see things through, and we want to let God shift in our thinking. It is not how I would do it. How would Jesus do it? How would God do it? Jesus said and did all sorts of things to back that up, by the way. He said to love your enemy. That doesn't seem like a reasonable thing to do, He said to do good to those who hate you. Who wants to do that? He said to bless those who curse you and to pray for those who persecute you. All things that seem contrary to how we want to react to. But Jesus said that. And he said to love one another as I have loved you. This is because that's what Jesus did. No exceptions, no stipulations, no, boundaries to that. And that's the way he's calling us to that. He's that perfect lens. The way he looked at people, the way he looked and valued them, the way he looks and values you, the way he looks and values at the person that just cut you off in traffic, the way he looks and values the person, in front of you at the store, taking all your time up, whatever it is. That's the way he wants us to look at them. And so when I started to let this idea take over my thinking, it did flip the answer to this question is, it was no, I'm not sure it's reasonable. Now, it's an absolute, obvious yes. It is completely reasonable. There's this passage in Romans, maybe you've read this, maybe you, I don't know. It says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." One of the translations actually says, this is the most sensible way to serve God. Or this is reasonable service. Because when you have stared the grace and mercy of God in the face, in light of your shortcomings and your sin, and you've looked him in the eyes, and he's forgiven you, and you've received that, there's nothing more reasonable to do than to love the way that you've been loved, than to serve the way Jesus has served you, than to give as much as he has given to you. There's no more appropriate response than that. And so maybe the first step you need to make today is to receive it. Because you can't give what you don't got. Is that proper grammar? No. You can't give out what you don't have inside of you. And so the first step maybe you need to do today is maybe you got here before this, you didn't know, now you do, that the creator of the universe sent his son, and he gave his life as a ransom payment for your sin and my sin, that you could be forgiven and that you could have a life abundant, and that it's available to you for free, that it's not based on your merits, it's a free gift of God. We read that verse, it's a free gift of God. And so maybe that's what maybe you've been out on the outer edge of this whole church, faith, God thing, and you're just, I'm not sure. And now it's time to take that step and to say yes to God. And so maybe that's you. Maybe that's the first thing you need to do. The second thing, maybe you've forgotten. You just, like we forget. Like we celebrate Memorial Day once a year, right? We get the decorations out. We fry some meat. We hang out with family and friends. We put some patriotic music on, and then Tuesday we go back to our normal life. And I'm not indicting you. You all are wonderful. But that's what we do, right? And then we go and live our lives the rest of the year with, barely a thought to any of this stuff. Maybe a 4th of July comes around, or if you celebrate. Now, if you're a family member of a service member, that's a totally different thing. It's always on your mind. But for a lot of us, it's like we just forget. We live our lives normal, as if nothing ever happened. As if these freedoms that we have just happened. And for us as Christians, we come to church once a week. We sing these great songs. We, do the church thing. And then we go about the rest of our week as if, nothing was any different. And we just forget. And so maybe that's you. And that's, you just need to find a way to remind yourself on a regular basis of what Jesus has done for you, what the sacrifice that was made, of how much he's loved you, how much he loves you. And then maybe after all that, you just need to make a conscious decision. And it's really about asking God for his help. It's asking for him to do the work in you. And so if you have your tear off in the program, there's a really wordy question that I put in there. Sorry about that. I was sort of under pressure to get a question out so they could print these programs out. And so I have all these words for you. But the question is this: how do I need to change to become more like Jesus in the way I treat those who believe differently than me? And just to, let you know, it's not about you doing anything. It's about you inviting God to do the work in your life. If I could have wordsmithed it better, I would have gotten that in there. But how do I need to change? How do I want to let God work in my life to become more like Jesus? Christian means little Christ. That's our goal, is to become more like him in the way that I treat those who believe differently than me, who have different opinions than me, who look differently than me. How am I going to get around what God has done for me so that I can be like that? And in my interactions, and to be gracious and patient and respectful, the way that Jesus would have been with those that he was constantly coming into contact that were different than him. So if you take a moment to think about that, You can write something in your tear-off. Maybe you start here with the things that Jesus said. Maybe you have an enemy at work or in the neighborhood or in your family. And Jesus is just telling you, you got to love them. And I can't personally fill in all the details of how that works. And I'll give you a 5-step plan on how to, you got to work that out with your Father in heaven. Do good to those who hate you. Any haters, anybody who being hated, just do something good for them. Go out of your way. Make their day better. Bless those who curse you, or pray for those who persecute you. If you're in, school or work where being a Christian is tough, instead of being all defensive and whatnot, just pray for them. So maybe one of those is it. Also, there's this passage that Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians that talks about love, and this isn't just for married people. We oftentimes, you see this being read at a wedding, and it's not just for, weddings and married people. This is for all of us. This is the deeper levels of layers of what love is. And I'm going to read this, and maybe one of them jumps out to you, and that's what you write on the tear-off, is that love is patient, and love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. And maybe one of those things, God is nudging you to say, you know what? I know this relationship is tough, but just walk with me one more step. Just persevere just a little bit more. Or maybe you have a list of wrongs that everybody's done to you, and Jesus just saying, let's just get rid of that list, and let's move on in love with these people. Maybe you have kids as an adult or whatever, and they're making choices that you're not really all that crazy about, and you just need to have patience and not talk about them with your friends and dishonor them, or maybe have a more hope for what could be for their life. I don't know. There's so many nuances, and I want you to write your own sermon to preach to yourself, to let Jesus lead you in one of the direction of any one of these things. And so as the team comes up, we're going to sing one more song, and we're going to give an offering. But the offering isn't just cash. It is your life in view of the mercy of God. If this is you and you're wanting to do this, we're going to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice because of what he has done for us. Lay this at the altar. Lay your life at the feet of Jesus. Let me pray, and then we're going to sing and give it to him. Jesus, we are so grateful for what you've given to us and what you sacrificed, just like how that inspired millions of men and women who gave their life up as a sacrifice. We're just so blown away that anybody would do any of that for any of us. And I pray that we would not forget. We would do whatever we can to remind ourselves on a regular basis of the price that was paid. And I pray that would encourage and inspire our hearts to move in a forward direction to you, with you, that you would begin to change the way and renovate the way that we interact with those around us, especially those who have never experienced or known your love, that you would use us to share that with them. I also pray just for everybody here right now. that you would wrap all of us up in your love, that we would just walk out of this place knowing and secure of where we are and whose we are. And we worship you and we thank you and we give this offering to you because you are deserving of it and worthy of it. And we pray this in your name. Amen.